Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading this morning, Canto 3, Chapter 32, Text 11. We'll see, we may go on. Just a little background summary. Going back to Godhead is where this discussion is leading, or focused around. The contrast of Grihamedi life and Grahastha life is where the chapter begins. Then going more deeply into the Grahastha life specifically, with detachment from the paraphernalia and the items of necessity, working rather than to get those things, working out of obligation or duty to the Supreme, dedication to the Supreme, fixing consciousness upon the Supreme, and so forth, as the characteristic of Grahastha life. And then the fruit, that's living one's life that way, then the fruit of that is, it's not specifically speaking of prema, but it's specifically speaking of attaining the abode of the Supreme Lord. We heard the destination of Brahma, and the worshippers of Garbhadakshayi Vishnu, Hiranya Garbha, at the end of Brahma's life. Of course, there's different Brahmas, and different Brahmas have different destinations, but speaking here specifically as Brahma who goes back to Godhead, those who take shelter of Hiranyagarbha, Garbhadakshayi Vishnu, they don't go directly back to Godhead, but they take birth in Brahmaloka, or even it says they merge with the body of Lord Brahma, and then when Brahma goes back to Godhead, they go back to Godhead. Just the previous verse, text 10. The yogis who become detached from the material world by practice of breathing exercises and control of the mind reach the planet of Brahma, which is far, far away. After giving up their bodies, they enter into the body of Lord Brahma. And therefore, when Brahma is liberated and goes to the Supreme Personality Godhead, who is the Supreme Brahman, such yogis also enter into the kingdom of God. But not necessarily. That's described also. At the bottom of the purport, such yogis or demigod worshippers are subjected to the chance of taking birth again when there is again creation. So here comes a therefore verse, text 11. Therefore is a signal. It says, summary, therefore, ataha. My dear mother, by devotional service, take direct shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is seated in everyone's heart. Now, he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Kapila. He's an incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he's speaking third person, but it's first person, and she knows that too. Purport. One can attain direct contact with the Supreme Personality of Godhead in full Krishna consciousness and revive one's eternal relationship with Him as lover, as Supreme Soul, as Son, as friend, or as master. Interesting. as Supreme Soul seems to be the neutrality or Shanta. One can re-establish the transcendental loving relationship with the Supreme Lord in so many ways, and that feeling is true oneness. The oneness of the Mayavadi philosophers and the oneness of Vaishnava philosophers are different. The Mayavadi and the Vaishnava philosophers both want to merge into the Supreme, but the Vaishnavas do not lose their identities. They want to keep their identity of lover, parent, friend, or servant. Paragraph. In the transcendental world, the servant and master are one. That is the absolute platform. Although the relationship of servant and master, although the relationship is servant and master, both the servant and the served stand on the same platform. That is oneness. Lord Kapila advised his mother that she did not need any indirect process. She was already situated in that direct process because the Supreme Lord had taken birth as her son. Actually, she did not need any further instruction because she was already in the perfectional stage. Kapila Dev advised her to continue in the same way. He therefore addressed his mother as Bhamini, to indicate that she was already thinking of the Lord as her son. Devahuti is advised by Lord Kapila to take directly to devotional service, Krishna consciousness, because without that consciousness, one cannot become liberated from the clutches of Maya. That's a very important message, the therefore summary message. The next verse embellishes this verse. It's speaking of some of the less direct. Maybe we'll cover that too. There's grades of devotional service, and the advocacy of Srimad Bhagavatam, here through the mouth of Lord Kapila, is not the indirect kind. There's so many varieties. We'll see some of the varieties of the indirect kind. My dear mother, someone may worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead with a special self-interest. But even demigods, such as Lord Brahma, great sages, such as Sanat Kumara, and great munis, such as Marichi, have to come back to the material world again at the time of creation. When the interaction of the three modes of material nature begins, Brahma, who is the creator of this cosmic manifestation and who is full of Vedic knowledge, and the great sages who are the authors of the spiritual path and the yoga system, come back under the influence of the time factor. They are liberated by their non-fruitive activities, and they attain the first incarnation of the Purusha, that's Mahavishnu. But at the time of creation, they come back in exactly the same forms and positions as they had previously. We read a little bit of this from that purport of 11.3, whatever it was, 18 or something like that. Purport that Brahma becomes liberated is known to everyone, but he cannot liberate his devotees. Demigods like Brahma and Lord Shiva cannot give liberation to any living entity. As it is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, only one who surrenders unto Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, can be liberated from the clutches of Maya. Brahma is called here Adya Sthira Charanam. He is the original, first created living entity. And after his own birth, he creates the entire cosmic manifestation. He was fully instructed in the matter of creation by the Supreme Lord. Here he is called Veda Garbha, which means that he knows the complete purpose of the Vedas. He is also accompanied by such great personalities as Marichi, Kashyapa, and the seven sages, as well as by great mystic yogis, the Kumaras, and many other spiritually advanced living entities, but he has his own interest separate from the Lord's. Bheda drishtya means that Brahma sometimes thinks that he is independent of the Supreme Lord. Remember that from yesterday, that purport? Or he thinks of himself as one of the three equally independent incarnations. Sometimes. The Brahma that's mentioned in Canto 2, Chapter 9, prays to Lord Vishnu, please protect me from that. We should also pray. Whatever service we do, we don't think we're independently the doer. Small item. Brahma is entrusted with the creation. Vishnu maintains, and Rudra, Lord Shiva, destroys. The three of them are understood to be incarnations of the Supreme Lord in charge of the three different material modes of nature, but none of them is independent of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Here the word Bheda Drishtya occurs because Brahma has a slight inclination to think that he is as independent as Rudra. Sometimes Brahma thinks that he is independent of the Supreme Lord. And the worshipper also thinks that Brahma is independent. For this reason, after the destruction of this material world, when there's again creation, by the interaction of the material modes of nature, Brahma comes back. We heard this yesterday. Although Brahma reaches the Supreme Personality Godhead as the first Purusha incarnation, Mahavishnu, who is full with transcendental qualities, he cannot stay in the spiritual world. Paragraph. The special significance of his coming back may be noted. Brahma and the great rishis and the great master of yoga, Shiva, are not ordinary living entities. They are very powerful and have all the perfections of mystic yoga, but still they have an inclination to try to become one with the Supreme, and therefore they have to come back. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, it is accepted that as long as one thinks that he is equal with the Supreme Personality God and he is not completely purified or knowledgeable, in spite of going up to the first Purusha avatar, Mahavishnu, after the dissolution of this material creation, such personalities again fall down or come back to the material creation. Final paragraph. It is a great fall down on the part of the impersonalist to think that the Supreme Lord appears within a material body, and that one should therefore not meditate upon the form of the Supreme, but should meditate instead on the formless. For this particular mistake, even the great mystic yogis or great stalwart transcendentalists also come back again when there is creation. All living entities, other than the impersonalists and monists, can directly take to devotional service in full Krishna consciousness and become liberated by developing transcendental loving service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Such devotional service develops in the degrees of thinking of the Supreme Lord as Master, as Friend, as Son, and at last as Lover. These distinctions in transcendental variegatedness must always be present. Well, several things. The foremost thing is in the therefore verse, text 11. Text 11. Direct, as opposed to indirect. And direct doesn't mean jump over the spiritual master or the representative of Krishna. Doesn't mean that. Direct, in that sense, is through the mercy of the representatives of Krishna. But the surrender is to Krishna. To say it the other way. Who is the deliverer? When one engages properly in devotional service, who is the deliverer? The spiritual master, or the disciplic succession, or some other options? Or Krishna is the deliverer. The point of surrender is to the current link, as Prabhupada calls, to the spiritual master. But the deliverer is Krishna. That is to say, the representative acts as the instrument of Krishna, and therefore is accepted as good as Krishna, but that's not Krishna, nor the deliverer. Krishna is the deliverer. But the point of contact for Krishna is the representative of Krishna. That philosophy, and then the practical sentiment of the practitioner needs to be very clear. It's an essential part of Guru Tattva, an essential part of being a devotee, an essential part of our path of spiritual life. How we properly view and not improperly view the means of deliverance and the mercy that Krishna gives through the medium of those who are distributors of his mercy. So the direct method is being recommended strongly. So then this next, there are very, very qualified people that may not achieve the fruit, certainly not Krishna Prema, nor their particular rasa. They're interested in liberation, so they get some kind of liberation, apparently. But if there's still this thinking of separate, it's spoken of which chapter is it? Chapter 29? Yeah, chapter 29. This is 32. In chapter 29, there's a question at the beginning of the chapter. Devahuti asks, you've described in chapter 28 about devotional service being so wonderful and not different than the Supreme Lord and so forth. So devotional service is fully transcendental. Is it possible for devotional service to be mixed with the modes, although it's fully transcendental? The answer is yes. Just like the air is pure, but the air can be polluted. But the air isn't polluted. The air isn't contaminated. They're just contaminants within the air. Smog or smell or something. But so the air carries the aroma, but the air is not the aroma. The air carries the aroma. So bhakti may be tainted, at least the consciousness of the performer of bhakti may be tainted with the modes, and then describing the mode of goodness starts with ignorance, then passion, then goodness. And these other modes, there's different Sanskrit terms, but it's apratak buddhi, or different terms like that. Prabhupada calls it a separatist, thinking oneself separate. That's distinct from the quality of goodness, and certainly not transcendence. So bhakti that can be mixed that's indirect. Here, the word is bheda drishcha. We know that bheda and abheda, Lord Chaitanya's teachings is achintya, bheda, abheda tattva. So the bheda part means separate or distinct. And then there's the non-distinct, abheda. Everything is bheda and abheda in relation to the personality of Godhead. So if someone is thinking more on the bheda side and not sufficiently on the abheda side, so bheda drishcha. Drishcha is that they see different. They see themselves as independently powerful. To whatever degree one thinks like that, it may not be walking around with a puffed chest thinking macho. I'm powerful. I'm independently powerful from Vishnu. One may not explicitly be thinking like that, but if the converse is, if we're not thinking whatever capacity we have is endowed, given to us by the personality of Godhead, and therefore I'm using that in service to the personality of Godhead, to whatever degree that consciousness is weak, this other consciousness is going to fill the space. So the recommendation from text 11 is fully dependent upon the personality of Godhead. This is surrender, fully dependent. I'm acting vigorously, enthusiastically, with all energy and enthusiasm, fully at the same time, fully dependent. That is to say, with true humility, that means no false ego. You could say it, that's the negative, no false ego. Say it in the positive, true humility. So what's that true humility? I'm fully dependent. It's just reality. I'm fully dependent. I am Krishna's eternal servant, that's who I am, and I'm fully dependent upon Krishna to supply anything. Fully dependent. I have no independent existence. Fully dependent. Enthusiastically engaging in my activity of devotional service is not a false ego position if one is fully dependent. But it's certainly possible to be fully engaged in Krishna's service, thinking differently than I'm consciously thinking. Whatever ability I have is given to me by Krishna. Whatever resources available to me is given to me by Krishna. I'm simply deploying them in Krishna's service. It's subtle, but it's a difference between going back to Godhead and taking birth again. So the subtle distinction is very important. Cultivation of bhakti in the right manner is very important. We're definitely not there. Not like maybe we're not there. We're definitely not there. But we should be very clear what it is that we're cultivating. Because if we don't, then there's these consequences. And specifically, the language that Prabhupada says, because Brahma has a slight inclination to think that he is as independent as Rudra, thinking oneself as independent as Rudra, and then the next is as independent as Supreme Lord. What's that? That's the Mayavadi oneness. Let's say it again. Say it the other way. Mayavadi oneness is one thinks oneself to be independently powerful. You may not be, again, in the macho walking or strutting around saying, I'm independently powerful. Demons do that. To the extent that we're not thinking of ourselves fully dependent upon the Supreme Lord, to that degree it's mixed bhakti, apratak buddhi, or bheda drishtya, and that's the indirect. I hope it's clear. This is teaching us the refinement that's necessary in the cultivation of our devotional service. This isn't just storybook. This is about our devotional service. And we have to have, proper signal. Have to have our compass directed in the proper way and Otherwise, we're not going to get to the destination. We can say the goal is prema, but then the fruit of that prema is experiencing love of God, and that carries one to the spiritual world. Krishna carries one to the spiritual world. But that prema has to be there. Then there's nothing else. And if there's something else, we don't go back to Godhead. We don't get that prema. We'll continue in our devotional service countless lifetimes. And then at the end of Brahma's life, attain the abode of Mahavishnu, and again take birth at the next creation. Gee whiz. So we have to get it right. We have to understand the message that's being explained. And carefully cultivate. In that same chapter 29, that the chapter where is bhakti mixed, can bhakti be mixed with the modes? And Kapila says yes. No, bhakti is pure, but one's consciousness may not be pure, affected by the modes. So then after describing all of that and extolling the virtue of bhakti that's unmixed, Kapila Dev gives some verses where he explains how that is cultivated. And exactly the same point is presented here and we're discussing. There's a sadhana. One has to have proper understanding of the orientation of pure devotional service and the sadhana to cultivate that. We need to do it. Otherwise, one can become elevated up to the point, like it's said here, the abode of Mahavishnu at the end of Brahma's life, cosmic annihilation, attain that. But if there's still some of this bheda drishtya, that's contamination with the modes of nature, and one will take birth again. It's an unfulfilled desire. This is described by very interesting, very subtle, by Jiva Goswami in a portion of Bhakti Sandarbha. It's text 153. He describes the situation of Bharat Maharaj. One of those questions that comes up every now and then is, how is it possible Bharat Maharaj attained the stage of Bhava Bhakti and he fell down? How can you fall down from Bhava Bhakti? And different answers to that question, but Jiva Goswami states, similar to this, he says it was due to an offense in a previous life, aparad. So, and he justifies it by the statement that's in the verse, directly in a verse spoken by Shukadeva Goswami, which says, due to a desire that was not fulfilled, prarabdha karma, Jiva Goswami identifies, the deer manifest. That's how karma works. It's not just you do something, but an object may be out there for the purpose of fulfilling an unfulfilled desire. Prarabdha karma, manifest. Bhakti, he says, is powerful than prarabdha karma. So bhakti could have, mowed the lawn, taking care of the prarabdha karma. So it wasn't specifically because of some past desire unfulfilled. Rather, Jiva Goswami says, it's because of some offense that he chose the object, the prarabdha karma object, instead of staying with bhakti. He chose consciously, stop bhakti, go after the prarabdha karma object. Why? Due to a previous offense. So now, interesting. Consider the 10 offenses against the holy name. Maintain material attachments, in spite of understanding so many instructions in this matter. There's one. Remaining inattentive while chanting. Not understanding the non-difference of the holy name of Krishna with Krishna. So we do these things. We're engaging in namaparad, or at least unless we're trying to clear the situation, then it's namabhas. We have to be trying to clear that situation consciously. Same as what's being said here. The direct as opposed to the indirect. Not for the purpose of getting free from karma, not for the purpose of getting salvation, not for some other purpose other than the direct service to the personality of Godhead, period. And, variegated moods of love, or rasa, towards the personality of Godhead, mentioned these 5. And that may be, at a more mature stage of our devotional practice, where we have some idea of our rasa. But the preliminary, just like in Brahma Samhita, the first realization of Brahma was that his position, his constitutional position, is that as the eternal servant. Then mature stage of that is he understood that he was the eternal maidservant. He understood his rasa, at least, in a preliminary way, which later became more fully manifest, according to Brahma Samhita and Bhaktisiddhanta's commentary. A preliminary inclination. So for us, sadhakas, followers of the message of Bhagavatam and our founder Acharya, we need to be not unclear, we need to be very clear what the Bhagavatam is teaching us and where we may be off the mark. And on the strength of the hearing process and sadhu sangha and nirahankriya and so forth, messages of Kapila Dev to Devahuti, come to the stage where it's unmixed. That's where the Bhagavatam is taking us, if we hear it properly. Not just, join the team, become a bhakta. We have to know what our position is as member of the team, and what our function is, how to direct our consciousness while we're cultivating bhakti. Very important. Very important. Any discussion? Yes.
Thank you, Maharaj. I have one question. The example that you gave about, how one may feel equal to, Supreme or merging into Supreme and all. So at my level, those thoughts doesn't necessarily come to my thoughts okay, I want to become like Shiva, or I want to become one with Supreme. What are the subtle ways in which we should understand, are there any examples?
Sure. You can say it by negation. We've been discussing Queen Kunti's prayer, so just use that as a context. She's humble, and she's humble, and she's humble, and she's humble, and she's humble. She's qualified, she's qualified, she's qualified, she's qualified. She's humble. So pervasive is this mood of humility. And that's the entry point into bhakti. So similarly for us, if that humility is absent, not, flagellation, beat yourself up in a corner or something, but in a spiritual conception of humility, if that's absent, to a degree that's absent, we've got this other thing going on. We may not, as I said it twice, say it a third time, we not be macho, strutting around saying, or consciously cultivating, gee, I'd like to be equal to Lord Shiva or Lord Brahma or Lord Vishnu. We may not be consciously thinking like that, but we're thinking like that to the degree that we're not in that mood of humility. So bhakti is very powerful. To enter into the realm of bhakti, that complete humility, genuine humility, not, what's the word? The conventional word about self-deprecation. It's low self-esteem, that's the term. It's not advocating low self-esteem. It's not like that at all. It's reality, spiritual reality. Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains this enthusiasm, just taking from Nectar of Instruction, utsahan. He concludes, one cannot sustain enthusiasm without a spiritual conception, because otherwise it's passion, this enthusiasm. We're conducted by the modes, and we're enthusiastic in the modes. And so there has to be a spiritual conception. A spiritual conception is the conception of humility, and that is, the spiritual conception. I'm this tiny fragmental part of Krishna, meant for his service, and to do anything, I'm fully dependent upon him, because I'm just this little tiny spark. Spark has quality like the fire. Jiva Goswami uses this language, vyasti and samasti. It's really nice. It's like one of the, excuse me for digressing, but it gets connected to your question. We have to understand our philosophy and live by it, otherwise we're under these other influences, thinking ourselves equal. By default. If the humility isn't there, by default we're over there. The continuation of false ego under the modes. We're over there. So we have to cultivate the opposite. So Jiva Goswami explains, in order to understand the message of Srimad Bhagavatam, so there's Pramana Kanda and Prameya Kanda. Prameya is what the Bhagavatam teaches. There's 3 parts. One of those 3 parts is to understand the message of the Bhagavatam. It's the message of Bhagavan. To understand Bhagavan, we can study the living entity because he's part and parcel of Bhagavan. The Vyasti Samasti. So what's the consciousness of the living entity that's part and parcel? To the extent that there's this feature of Sat Chit Ananda, it's fully dependent upon the Sat Chit Ananda part being connected with the whole through submission and devotion. So if we don't have that, we're over in this other territory, being covered in so we're sadhakas, we're cultivating. We have to be cultivating properly, not just mechanically. Get up and take my bath and put on tilak and run down to Mangalarti and do the behaviors of bhakti. It's the cultivation of the consciousness. So to the degree, I'm trying to respond to your question, we're not walking around thinking, I want to be equal to Vishnu, or I want to be equal to Lord Shiva or Lord Brahma. We're not thinking that. To the degree that we're not thinking the other, we're thinking like that. Maybe not explicitly, but implicitly. We're in the zone of bhakti mixed with the modes. And how do we get out of that? We have to know what bhakti unmixed is and cultivate it in the proper way. The teaching is there for us to do it. And if we're not doing that, we're over in this other zone to some degree. There's one of my godbrothers, I won't mention his name. He says, we're the International Society for Introducing People to Krishna Consciousness. We have to go beyond introducing people to Krishna consciousness, where we introduce people how to perform bhakti that's unmixed. We may not, go to a new audience and say, you got to do this. They'll go, what do you... So we, chant and be happy, take prasadam, come to the Sunday program. Then, as instruction goes further, at least those that are sincere and serious, using Prabhupada's language, directly in these purports, then one needs this information and guidance and assistance to cultivate properly. Internally, we need to do that. And in our introducing people to Krishna consciousness, it's just chant to be happy, take prasadam, offer your food to Krishna. Rise early in the morning, become regulated. Don't violate principles of Dharma. Be honest and have honest occupation and so forth and so on. It's like making wet wood into dry wood, and then there's igniting the dry wood. So that there's the intention of the dry wood, wet becoming dry, is fulfilled. So we're in that space where we're practicing devotional service, but we're not at Shuddha Bhakti yet. So these instructions are for us. Does that address your question? Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Regarding Bharat Maharaj's narration which you said, Maharaj, like he was in the Bhava stage, but still there was a previous offense which he didn't know he committed. So and he fell down. So in my case, I don't know what aparadhs I had done before. So what would be if I can, how can I prevent myself from, by doing conscious sadhana, can I be protected? Or
yeah, by doing conscious, that's a nice way to say it. By doing conscious sadhana, you can be protected. And conscious sadhana includes carefully avoiding offenses. So you're responsible for previous offenses. And those previous offenses, it didn't demand that he give up bhakti because of the previous offense. It put him on that position where he could, and he did, even at the bhava stage. Free will is operative even in the bhava stage. He chose unwisely because of that. Okay? So you're protected by conscious sadhana. And proper protection under spiritual authority and guidance and so on. So in other words, even if you start to veer off the middle of the road, someone can tap you on the shoulder and say, you're heading for the ditch. You better get back in the middle of the road. There's strength beyond our own strength through association. And that's exactly what Kapila says. I mean, earlier in chapter 25, it's sadhusanga. In chapter 29, it's arya sangena. It's the same thing. Association will help us overcome the weaknesses due to our past mistakes, including offenses. They're not easily removed. So we need strength beyond our own strength. We have to stay in close association. Lord Chaitanya said that to Sanatana Goswami in his teaching, directly in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Sadhu Sangha is needed to begin bhakti. And even up to the topmost stages of bhakti, Sadhu Sangha is imperative. Something over here?
Maharaj, based on your sharing of what your godbrother said about the International Society for introducing people to Krishna consciousness, does Harinam make devotees?
Sure. Sure. And it's part of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission, is to engage us and others in Harinam Sankirtan. It's not to say we, don't do that, or it's superfluous. What's behind your question?
I was having a discussion with a devotee, and the observation is that Harinam is more for devotees to stay in Krishna consciousness, or that's how it's
Well,
observed.
it's all levels. It's introduce, to stay, and to become perfect.
Because there's no, like one can hear the holy name and sure that has an effect, but there's no, interaction with people generally on Harinam. Like
Meaning,
nobody-
if you just have it in the temple room instead of in the public? Is that what you're speaking about?
Actually, I was talking about on the streets.
On the street, okay.
So we're not like...
So say your point again. What's the specific focus that you're concerned about, or has it been addressed?
Well, so somebody comes to hear the holy name, but we're not cultivating. There's no cultivation.
That's silly. In Bhaktisiddhanta's language, simultaneously good for them and good for you. So both. Why it's good for you and not good for them? How is that possible? Why then? What are you doing? You don't need to go in the public.
But one will not start their sadhana.
No.
Yeah.
Question. People that pass by on Harinam, and all the different spectrums of responses that they may have. Is there purification taking place for those persons that are just passers-by, even the one that put their hands over their ears? Is there purification taking place for those people, or no? Definitely. So we're performing Harinam Sankirtan, public Sankirtan, for that purpose. And is there additional purpose that those who are performing Harinam Sankirtan are becoming additionally purified themselves? No or yes? Yes. There's not one to the exclusion of the other. And then supposing there's somebody in that assembly that's a pure devotee of the Lord, or on their, nearly at the stage of pure devotion. Are they being further enhanced in their relationship with Krishna by offenselessly chanting the holy name? Yes. Beginning, intermediate, and advanced. All three. Why not? Why one to the exclusion of the other? Drop one of them out because, for what reason?
So the point of the statement you made for introducing people to Krishna.
Yeah, this my godbrother is saying, it's not that we should not introduce people. The practitioners should be thinking how to go to the next level, how to go to the next level. And that's Bhaktivinoda Thakur's teaching also. Now some persons may be more inclined to, it's kind of like, the Bhakti Vriksha model that's being, established here in a formal way. So that's introducing people. And then part of the introducing people model is, of those persons introduced, some are being prepared and trained to become group leaders, so they can then lead others. And then there's another stage where they go into more systematic study of the teaching, but there's the introduction, training to introduce others, going more deeply, not just introduce people. This godbrother is encouraging those once introduced should be supported in going more deeply. And it's not, disconnect. It's not that if you continue introducing people, you're not going to go more deeply. Or if you go on Harinam, all that you're thinking about is good for other people, or all that you're thinking about is good for you. So his point is, there should be some very clear plan for people who have been introduced to take them to the next level. It's exactly what Bhaktivinoda Thakur writes. Each one of us, on the one hand, should be honest about what our position is. We had this whole one of our Gita Nagari retreats was acceptance and progress. Accept your position in an honest way. This is where I'm at, using the vernacular. This is where I'm at. And that's where I want to be. But I don't feel upset with myself or something, or pretend I'm something I'm not. I just accept what, but continue to cultivate, continue to progress. Because Bhaktivinoda Thakur teaches, unless you continue striving to progress, you will not. You need to, look to where we're going next so that we can get there. Not an artificial jump, but something that's sustainable. So it's good, it's the whole, there's a continuum of progress from introducing further cultivation, so forth and so on. It's all there within that activity. And all those things are taking place depending upon one's position in their trajectory of spiritual elevation. The person that's spiritually elevated isn't thinking, the heck with these people that are being introduced. I don't care a hoot about them, I care about myself. They're not thinking that. Good for you and good for them at the same time. That's how they're thinking. That's the mercy of Mahaprabhu. And one becomes an instrument of that and the beneficiary of that. Something else? Yes?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. When even the position of Lord Brahma and Kumaras, even at their positions, they are like founders of two of the Vaishnava Sampradayas. How is it possible to think that they are independent of Krishna sometimes? So,
We're inclined to think of them as independent?
no.
Are they inclined to think of themselves as independent?
That's right.
Well, there's different, according to this purport, sometimes.
So how is it possible even at that stage?
Mercy. Look, the four Kumaras got the mercy of Lord Narayan. And then their interest became one thing, the lotus feet of Lord Narayan. Mercy. All right? You're not so sure. You okay? Okay. Something?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. I was thinking about being cultivating the creeper of devotion.
You're thinking of what?
Being the cultivator, growing the creeper
Continuum of cultivation of Krishna consciousness.
Growing the creeper of devotion. Bhakti Lata, growing the Bhakti Lata. So that gives me kind of all this getting mixed up about my
Getting mixed up?
Mixed up or thinking myself independent, or any independence I have from, not being so completely dependent on Krishna. I think I do away with such confusion and problems when I think of this growing the creeper of devotion. That everything I do in the most positively, like chanting properly, eating only prasada, everything I do is going towards cultivating this creeper. Then I should not do anything that will cause a harm to that process.
Right.
So that kind of, is it a simplistic thinking, or is it some, I think what is the problem with this ego? Why they think, then I think is it too simplistic in my mind, this adopting this, I have this picture of me becoming a little bit of a, growing the creeper of devotion. And I do everything towards that, just like watering the plant.
So this is an interesting narrative. What's the question?
I'm just thinking, is it my mind somewhat deficient or something, when I think so simplistically?
Simple is nice. Simple is nice.
Okay, thank you.
When, take the microphone from her. In the simple is nice model, be very clear with the goal of that cultivation. What does when the bhakti creeper becomes mature, what does it look like? And as you contemplate the mature stage of that bhakti creeper, it will help you attain that state. So be clear what it is. You continue with the process, the watering and the weeding and the cultivating, and be clear what the mature position is. A botanist, you know what botany is, study of plants. A study of plants, they can look at a seed or can look at a little, shoot that's coming out of the soil, and they can tell you what it is. How do they know? They're experienced. So they know that this little thing or that little thing is going to become one of those. Because they're experienced at it. So same for you. Cultivating the creeper of bhakti, when it grows, what does the mature stage look like? Part of the transformation of bhakti is meditating on the end result. Prabhupada gives us example of the caterpillar becomes a butterfly. It's right in Bhagavad Gita purport. He doesn't want to just crawl, he wants to fly. So meditating, it's the mind. Meditating on, I want to fly. Then some metamorphosis takes place and comes out of this little cocoon and he's got a butterfly body. Similarly, not the same, but similarly, when doing the cultivation of the bhakti creeper, have an idea, and as you hear, have a clearer idea what the end product is. What's the bhakti creeper in its mature stage look like? It has flowers, and then it has fruits. Love of God, and it's curled up at the lotus feet of Krishna, offering the fruit from the creeper of bhakti to Krishna. Meditate on that, even if it's very simple. That's the prayojana. While doing the abhideya, while doing the cultivation, what's the objective? And it can be very simple. Making offerings of fruits at the lotus feet of Govinda. That's a nice meditation. It can be very simple. And then, as you said, then something that interferes with that, you leave it. You're not in a harsh way, or a defiant way, or immature way, or an impulsive way, but you progressively leave that. And just do this bhakti lata cultivation. Gonna end? Thank you very much. Prabhupada ki jai.